Lady Justice is often depicted as blindfolded to symbolize the impartiality of justice. However, much like everyone else, the people that make up the justice system can be influenced by their explicit and implicit biases. In this presentation, we will discuss biases based on gender stereotypes that can have profound effects on legal proceedings, with an emphasis on custody decisions and sentencing for violent crimes. For example, early in American history, the father had sole custody of the children. Since property rights were solely vested in the husband, and children were considered property at the time, parental rights were also solely vested in the husband. This changed in the 19th century with the introduction of the tender years doctrine, in which the mother was the preferred custodian for young children. Supporters of the doctrine claimed that mothers were more nurturing and shared a special bond with their children. This idea was prevalent until the 1960s, when courts began to phase out the tender years doctrine in favor of the best interests of the child. Some courts have even ruled that the tender years doctrine violates the 14th Amendment because it denies equal protection to fathers. As a result, the United States currently has gender-neutral child custody laws. Still, gender bias continues to influence child custody decisions. Even though the tender years doctrine was replaced by the end of the 20th century, a study from 2002 suggests that judges may still show maternal preference in child custody decisions. The judges were given a questionnaire that asked whether they agreed with statements such as, "Mothers by nature make better parents than fathers." The judges more strongly agreed with statements that indicated maternal preference. This was further investigated in 2004, when a researcher conducted interviews with judges from Indiana about the tender years doctrine. Some quotes from the interviews include, "I believe, other things equal, that at that kind of age, the mother is a better caregiver, and that men seem to be more lacking in some of the nurturing areas. Even though the tender years doctrine is no longer in effect, gender biases perpetuate maternal preference in custody proceedings." In 2014, only 17.5% of custodial parents were fathers, which is not statistically different from the percentage in 1994. Gender biases also exert their influence in the sentencing for violent crimes. For example, Lizzie Borden was the primary suspect in the grisly axe murder of her father and stepmother in 1892. For whatever reason, after the media accused her of being disinterested in the trial, she began to act more stereotypically feminine. In fact, the New York Sun wrote that Miss Borden's womanhood was fully established when she burst into tears. Her defense attorney argued that it was morally and physically impossible for a woman to commit such a gruesome act, and both the defense and the prosecution called her a poor defenseless girl, even though she was 32 years old at the time. The murders were considered too brutal to be executed by a woman, so Borden was acquitted despite her conflicting accounts of the event. From 1980 to 2003, males, indicated by the dark gray bars, were consistently arrested at higher rates than women, indicated by the light gray bars, for violent crimes, which include assault, homicide, rape, and robbery. Data from the FBI in 2015 indicates that this imbalance persists, with males disproportionately arrested for violent crimes. One might argue that men are simply more prone to committing violent crimes. If that were so, then men and women convicted of violent crimes should receive comparable sentences. However, a study from 2006 found that women on average received shorter sentences. This was most apparent for violent crimes, in which women received 4.49 years less prison time than men. A more recent study in 2014 found that females in juvenile court were less likely to receive severe outcomes at detention and intake than males, suggesting that gender bias continues to influence sentencing.
Clearly, there is a system in place that views and protects women as innocents, whereas men are often seen as perpetrators of crimes. The juxtaposition of these perceptions is synthesized and most explicitly seen in the judicial system in cases of domestic violence. We would like to point out that there are many different relationship types and dynamics. However, for the purposes of our investigation, we focused only on interactions within cisgender heterosexual relationships. Through screening processes of couples engaging in severe levels of domestic abuse, it was found that 82% of couples reported violence perpetrated by their partner as well as themselves. This reported finding was corroborated against the partner's responses, such that there was a significant agreement of wife-to-husband physical aggression and also significant agreement of husband-to-wife physical aggression. This was found in a correlative study with an R-squared value of 0.9 and 0.84 respectively. The study continues, however, that although there is equal occurrence of violence between the genders, there is different tactics and motivations behind these violent acts. Through further surveying of the couples, it was found that women more frequently resorted to use of weapons in aggressive outbursts, as in throwing objects or threatening the use of a knife or gun. Men were more likely to use their own bodies in aggressive outbursts by hitting, punching, or strangulation. The study posits, then, that because of this found motivational difference, aggression by men is more often a tactic of power or control as opposed to an attempt to injure. As a result of the differential manifestation of aggression between genders, further consideration should be given to determining whether there are underlying biological factors to the mechanisms of aggression. In current studies, the hypothalamus has been identified as a common denominator of aggressive behaviors across many examined species, including humans. Branching out from the hypothalamus, many different areas of the brain have been found to be activated in aggressive states, such as the medial preoptic area, lateral septum, periaqueductal gray, medial amygdala, and bed nucleus of the stria terminalis. Like many behavioral pathways in the brain, these brain regions are not connected in any linear manner. In fact, these associated regions are differentially activated based on the particular social context. For example, the posterolateral medial amygdala and ventromedial hypothalamus are associated with regulation of aggression in defensive contexts, whereas the posterodorsal medial amygdala is associated with regulation in offensive contexts. This is commonly and most obviously exhibited in aggressive displays by dogs, in which a defensive dog will have a hunched posture and lowered tail, but an offensive dog will maintain a stiff, raised posture that more directly confronts the inducing stimuli. One study that was conducted in a group of human patients that had been diagnosed with hyperaggressive behaviors conducted 2 experiments in which there were deep brain stimulations and surgical lesions made within the hypothalamus. Deep brain stimulation is widely recognized as a functional and non-invasive form of lesioning, and so the outcomes were hypothesized to be similar. Following treatment, the study concluded the hyperaggressive behavior of these subjects was abolished. In addition to a variety of associated brain regions, there is also a wide variety of neuromodulatory molecules that act on these regions to regulate aggressive behaviors. These molecules, in part, include dopamine, GABA, noradrenaline, nitric oxide, serotonin, and steroid hormones. Here we will specifically focus on the roles of serotonin, testosterone, and vasopressin. Serotonin is a wide-reaching molecule that affects a variety of regions in the brain. Its major roles are in mood regulation and impulsivity. There are 2 receptors of note in the regulation of aggression, the 5-HT1A and 5-HT1B receptors, located post- and presynaptically, respectively. The interaction of serotonin at these receptors is in no way straightforward. However, the majority of studies find that activation of these receptors inhibit aggressive behaviors, and as one would expect, inhibition of these receptors decrease these behaviors. Binding at the 5-HT1B receptor has been found to decrease the serotonergic tone, and therefore supports the idea of modulatory effects of the serotonergic pathway on other neurotransmitter systems related to aggression regulation. The most colloquially associated hormone with aggression is testosterone. This molecule is most widely known for its role in regulating sexual development and behaviors and aggression in both males and females. Testosterone stimulates neural activity such that aggression-inducing stimuli become more salient and result in an exacerbation of aggressive behaviors. Mutations in androgen receptors in both males and females resulted in a decrease in aggressive behavior displays in rats. Perhaps most interestingly, in a study conducted in humans, there was an increase in testosterone in males and females when put into competitive situations. In a replication study, however, there was conflicting evidence in that women either exhibited elevated testosterone or maintained their normal levels. This may indicate that testosterone plays a larger role in aggression regulation in males than in females.
Vasopressin is another example of a neuromodulatory molecule that can instigate aggressive behavior. This is exemplified in prairie voles. Differences between prairie voles and other non-monogamous vole species is partially due to activation of the promoter region in the vasopressin 1A gene. This gene regulates the distribution and density of vasopressin receptors in brain tissue. Additionally, prairie voles were found to have greater increases in oxytocin receptors and neural structures involved in the reward pathway. Similar studies in rats that assess maternal behavior found that oxytocin is important in instigating maternal behavior in virgin female rats. The behavior they were observing was pup retrieval, which is when the mother retrieves pups that stray from the nest. When virgins were co-housed with mothers and not given oxytocin, it took the virgins 2 days to exhibit retrieval behaviors. However, when virgins were given oxytocin and co-housed with mothers, it only took the virgins 12 hours to exhibit retrieval behavior. Furthermore, when virgins were not cohoused with mothers, but still cohoused with pups, they exhibited retrieval behavior when they were given oxytocin. It did take them 6 days, but they did not even have to witness the behavior in order to start retrieving pups. These researchers also found that oxytocin receptors are only required when animals first begin to retrieve, but are unnecessary for expression of retrieval behavior thereafter. They also found that the left auditory cortex was required for retrieval behavior, but the right auditory cortex was not. This implies lateralization in brain structures required for maternal behavior. Studies with human women found significant brain changes that occurred after having children. There were increases in gray matter volumes in the prefrontal cortex, parietal lobe, and midbrain in mothers who were 4 months postpartum. Moreover, activation of the mesolimbic, mesocortical, and nigrostriatal dopaminergic pathways occurred when mothers heard a recording of a baby crying. These pathways are involved in approach and seeking behavior. More specifically, the right hemisphere had significantly greater activation to the sound of the cries than the left hemisphere. Additionally, when baby cries were heard, females exhibited greater deactivation of the default mode network compared to males. This suggests that neural differences between genders may cause greater difficulty in being able to shift attention. This is because the default mode network is associated with daydreaming, and deactivation of this network implies focusing on a specific task. In regard to hormonal changes, estrogen was also found to increase oxytocin receptor expression in the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis and ventral tegmental area. This is thought to initiate maternal behavior. There was also synchrony in oxytocin markers in women more so than men in regards to relationship stress. This implies that women are more sensitive to relationship stress. Now on to fathers. There were changes in hormone levels and brain regions in fathers. However, there are not many studies that show changes in fathers' neurobiology or behaviors after they have children. This is a product of the societal bias that men are not as important as women in caretaking. The studies that do exist state that new fathers do show increases in gray matter in the striatum and prefrontal cortex. There were also changes in levels of prolactin and testosterone found in fathers. Baby cries caused larger increases in prolactin levels in experienced fathers and in first-time fathers. This implies that some changes in neuromodulation can occur with greater time and experience. In addition, lower testosterone levels were found in fathers compared to non-fathers. This implies that males have to make trade-offs between mating efforts and parental care. Though both parents do experience changes in brain chemistry and volume, they exhibit different behavior towards their children. In regard to emotional expression, maternal sensitivity is expressed by emotional warmth and support, and paternal sensitivity is expressed by stimulating physically playful interactions. In another study, parents were asked to interact with their children for 10 minutes. Mother-child play was characterized by co-vocalization, mutual gazing, and affectionate touch, while father-child play was characterized by joint laughter and exuberance. For the father-child play, there were quick peaks of high arousal found in the child that were not found in the child and mother-child play. So what are the implications of all these findings? There are different neuromechanisms in men and women that can cause differences in parenting behaviors. However, not much is known about neural pathways in fathers, and what is known supports the fact that fathers do have adaptations that make them more fit for child rearing. The biases in society about male and female behavior do have some basis in science, but that does not mean that individual characteristics should not be taken into account in a court of law.